Murder by death.
Murder by death, murder by phallic symbols. No, hello everyone. Here we are live in the spoiler room. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I have an ensemble crew for this ensemble film as we continue our Murderous month here in July. Yes, looking at films that have the word murder in their title. And tonight we are looking at a ensemble a parody film of many mysteries, 1976's Murder by Death. It's a year younger than I am. Uh, so definitely looking forward to talking about it. And I got a wonderful people assembled to do that too. First off, back in the spoiler room with us, she was the blonde in front. She's currently the bald in front. It is none other than Katie Glidewell. How you doing, Katie?
I am doing great. Looking forward to talking about this film with you, lovely gents.
Fantastic. And then next to her is the artistically talented and one of the many critics of critics in this room. Actually, everybody's a critic. They're all my critics. They're all my favorite critics. And I'm not just saying that. Mr. Jeffrey York is with us here from the Establishing Shot. How you doing, Jeff?
Good, Mark. Good to see you all. Nice to be with you. I bet you I'm the only person in this room who saw this movie in the theater when it came out. Just want to throw that out there.
Well, that is wonderful. You give us a unique perspective then on it, for sure.
I find it more often than not these days. That's one of my assets is I was there before you all saw it on VHS.
I know the feeling. As I mentioned before, I was on a panel once with a bunch of YouTube movie reviewers, and I said I saw Empire Strikes Back in the theater, and there was this collective gasp, and they were all like, "What was that like?" And then I was just like, "I'm going to go in the corner now and just listen to my knees crack." You know.
Must have been so amazing in the 1900s.
Right?
Incredible.
In those late 1900s, you know.
They were aware that there were movies before Star Wars, right? A lot of them don't seem to know that.
Yeah.
It seems a little gray area for them. And yes, folks, you heard his dulcet tones. He's back with us as well. The man who I could talk Shakespeare, high caliber art, and trauma films all in the same conversation. None other than Mr. Joe Randazzo. Hey, Joe.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Great to be back.
Good to see you, Joe.
And finally, rounding out this wonderful cast is none other than my right-hand man who keeps coming back for more, though he may question his life choices after tonight. It is none other than Mr. Ian Simmons. How you doing, Ian?
I'm doing great. Wow, this movie.
this movie, oh boy. Okay, 76 was a different era for sure. But everyone, so pull up a chair, pop your favorite drink, and talk movie spoilers with us tonight as we look at Murder by Death. And Jeff, would you mind giving us tonight the synopsis of Murder by Death?
Yes, and I think to frame it, which may be necessary after Ian's editorial already, you have to understand that this was just a couple short years after the success of Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein. Saturday Night Live had premiered scant, I think, 6 or 7 months before that. So satire was kind of a big thing, and sort of these big productions, parodies of such were becoming very popular. And even Neil Simon dipped his toe into it after writing a number of successful Broadway plays. Their adaptions for the film world, or even original screenplays like The Goodbye Girl, which were doing very successful. Actually, that was a couple of years after this. But Neil Simon did a parody of really the sort of essential rich country estate trope that you would find in lots of the Agatha Christie or even to some degree Conan Doyle stories, where rich people or some people are gathered together for some sort of murder or crime, and somebody is the murderer, and you have to sort of solve the whodunit with whether it's Miss Marple or Sherlock Holmes or Agatha or Hercule Poirot, people like that. Here he manages to offend virtually every corner of the world of DEI by parodying lots of famous detectives at the time that we didn't realize until maybe this movie just how awfully sort of racist and sexist and all other kinds of un-PC stuff they were, which was perfectly acceptable at the time. It was a different time period when humor like that wasn't really frowned upon or raised an eyebrow. But the story concerns the isolated country home of one Lionel Twain, which is a parody of, I guess, on Lisp's there. He's an eccentric multimillionaire played by Truman Capote, and I believe his one and only film role.
Yeah.
But he has invited the world's greatest detectives for a weekend of murder, mystery, and mayhem, and offered $1 million to who can ever solve the murder that's going to take place at this mansion. And amongst the people that show up are parodies of Charlie Chan, Nick and Nora Charles, Hercule Poirot, Sam Spade, and Miss Marple. And they each are also accompanied by a guest. Now, Nick and Nora Charles don't need a guest because they already are a duo, but it's interesting because Simon writes these other characters to sort of be their foil. Charlie Chan's is his number one son, and Hercule Poirot doesn't show up with Colonel Hastings, which was the natural person that he could have parodied. Instead, he shows up with a French chauffeur. Miss Marple shows up with her nurse, who's actually older than her, so she has to take care of the nurse who's in a wheelchair and really says very little during it. And Sam Spade shows up with his kind of Moll, if you will, his long sort of suffering, needy secretary who is throwing herself constantly at the parody of Sam Spade, who's of course named Sam Diamond here. Neil Simon does not go very far to find the parodies in the names here. Miss Marple is Jessica Marbles. Ha ha ha! Slapping the knee already, aren't you, Ian? I tell you. But again, that was a different time when those kind of things were pretty funny, and with the Carol Burnett show and Your Show of Shows and all those kind of things that have been parodied and stuff for years, it kind of was all part and parcel of a more innocent and more sort of offensive time. But ultimately, it's got lots of twists, even though some of the humor and the jokes and the racism and sexism is very obvious. And at the time, it was a big hit. It did very well. It was very well received. They had some big stars in there who were at least famous on television, if not movies. Academy Award winners like Maggie Smith and David Niven were playing the Nick and Nora Charles parody. Peter Falk was coming off of his huge fame as Columbo. Peter Sellers, the return of the Pink Panther and some of the other roles that he had played, of all things, was playing Sidney Wang, who is the rather terrible pun and takeoff on Charlie Chan.
His son's a worse pun.
Yeah, that's right.
Willy Wang.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it was such low-hanging fruit, and I do mean hanging fruit, if you will, that tortured metaphor that works so many different ways here. But there are some pretty funny bits. But anyway, that's the basic plot of it, and craziness ensues. Oh, and maybe the coup of all time for casting was, of all people, they got Alec Guinness, the vaulted star of dramas like Bridge on the River Kwai and comedies like The Horse's Mouth and all kinds of stage, to play a blind butler whose name is Bensimum. And whenever he says his name, he's always, it's Bensimum, sir. And so everybody calls him Bensimum, sir. But he's just trying to be cordial but that's one of the running gags in this. And then there's also a cook who's, because we haven't offended enough people here, she's deaf mute, and she was played by Nancy Walker, who was, of course, famous for many things at the time, commercial campaigns for Bounty, the quicker picker-upper, as well as Rhoda's mom. So a lot of very accomplished actors and actresses here. In addition to those, Eileen Brennan shows up, James Cromwell. I think I mentioned James Coco plays the Poirot character, Elsa Lancaster, and Estelle Winwood as the nurse. So quite a few interesting cast people, and some I think are better in their roles than others, but we'll talk all about that.
Well,
So
it's hilarious with Alec Guinness, because I remember the interviews they talked to him about, with Star Wars and how it was kind of beneath him and he was just doing it, and then I'm watching him here play the blind butler interacting with the deaf mute maid, and I'm looking at him going, really?
And he gives it his all too. He is full throttle in this. I mean, he's doing the sort of twitchy eye, and it's crazy to see him do this, considering
he's playing it well, but it's still yeah, just one moment. Looks like we lost Joe, maybe because of weather.
Possible.
Unfortunately, yes, I appreciate Earth's Mightiest Critics. Here's some of you, all of you actually are Earth's Mightiest Critics, joining me here in the spoiler room during your storming that's going on. So thank you very much. Hopefully we can get Joe back. Yeah, I mean, well, I want to get everybody's feelings on this film real quick, and then we'll just dive into it deep. Katie, how'd you feel, top level feeling for Murder by Death?
I remember watching Murder. One, always love the title Murder by
Yes.
Death, because it's just, yeah, it's just so funny. And I remember watching this, but it's one of those things when I kind of go back to like me rewatching Once Bitten and forgetting about the shower scene when they say a word like 18 jillion times. Rewatching this film, it's like that shower scene the entire film. I mean, problematic, I think, is the number one word. And I even wrote this down. It's like Peter Falk as Sam Diamond. Good Lord, the stuff that comes out of his mouth. I mean, I rewatched this a few times, and God love you guys, it looks like crap on some of the stuff that I've seen. I mean, none of the quality looks that good at all. So I was like, the first time I tried doing it, and I'm like, all right, you know what? I'm going to come back to this because this is just hurting my head and in many ways. And then rewatching it today, it's like, seriously, the stuff that comes out of Sam Diamond's mouth. It's like I said out loud, oh shit, oh my god, really, like, I mean, just across the board, it's like he just checks the boxes on offending every race, religion, gender, I mean, sexual preference. It's like, good for you, guy. You made sure to hit everybody. And then he comes around, and then it's just the sweetest thing. And it's like, you know what? You're like that sweet and sour thing. I don't know what to think of you, Sam Diamond. Like, seriously. Like, what the hell? But then, my God, Maggie Smith and Eileen Brennan bow down, love them, especially the lines that come out of Maggie Smith.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
it's like,
I think she's the best thing in the film.
Yeah, that's one of the things about the film. There's so many things that they don't over explain, but then the characters kind of like do like a side eye. It's like, I'll tell you later. It's gross.
Do you remember the one where David Niven whispers what the meaning was, and she goes,
the thing. She's like,
that's tacky.
Oh, that's tacky.
That's
Yeah,
tacky.
but the way,
Like,
the way she says it.
But the way she says it is just, see, those are the best
really
lines,
tacky.
actually, not really the gag lines as much as those little offbeat lines that
Yes.
an actor of her caliber turns into gold.
Well, and then when she's looking at Miss Marple, she's like, I like her. I really like her. I'm like, and I love you, you Academy Award winning, multi-Emmy winning, like, love you to death, amazing bitch. Like, you are phenomenal in this film. Head to toe, everything she's wearing. And then Eileen Brennan, I'm loving her wardrobe and the fact that she's the mall, but she's like, it's like, did I do good? Did I do this? Like, why don't you kiss me? Why don't you do this? It's like, all right, let's go. And I mean, I just love her whole thing. Like, she's trying to be like a, what is it? Bergman from, it's that kind of like that Casablanca kind of thing that she has going on, but she's
carrying the
not.
torch.
She's like and, but here's the thing that I totally forgot rewatching this. Can we talk about James Cromwell's mesh short jumpsuit where he is completely naked underneath, and why that was a necessity in the wardrobe or to have in this film? I mean, I am watching this and I'm like, wait, I'm just gonna rewind that just a minute because like, I know the top part and then the side. Why the hell is that? I mean, and yeah, let me tell you, gentlemen, because I watched and I paid attention and he is completely naked underneath that. There's not anything.
Well, and
that's
they're treated
covering
like
up.
a married couple in it, essentially. I mean, they're sharing
Yeah.
the bed,
Yeah,
and
they are.
quibbling like an old, long couple that's been together too long. I mean, there's no
I mean-
sacred cows here, are there? Really?
Good for them on that. It still doesn't really explain why he's got a mesh short jumpsuit on. But hey, it's 76. He's a good-looking 6'6" tall guy. Good for him. I think he's 6 foot, maybe 6'7".
Yeah.
I don't know. He's
Yeah,
tall.
he's tall.
He's a very tall man. But yeah, that was definitely one of those things that I wrote down. It's like, let's talk about that mesh short jumpsuit. Okay.
And it's his
Like,
first feature.
wow, I forgot about that one.
What was that, Joe?
And it's his first feature in a
Yeah,
That's
career
right. He was
that's
mostly a
lasted at
TV
this
actor
point,
then.
Mhm.
5 decades now in the business. So good for him.
Wow.
Oscar nominee. I mean,
When
He
I-
won an
winner.
Emmy for American Horror Story, Katie.
yep.
yeah, when I saw his
Asylum.
name, pop up on the credits, I'm like, wait, Cromwell's in this? I'm like, okay, as if you couldn't have any more recognizable names into this film. Suddenly they have Cromwell as just the little text, and you're just like, wait, he's even playing.
Well, I mean, because back in '76, he wasn't James Cromwell.
Well,
he
yeah,
was,
no,
you know,
he was just
Right. He
James
was
Yeah,
just a
he's a nobody.
working
in
character
this-
actor on television mostly.
yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because I also did a deep dive into the IMDb
Mhm.
and seeing the people who were Katharine Hepburn was
Yeah.
a possibility of doing something for this, but then I think if I'm remembering this correctly, she didn't want to because of the handsiness of David Niven or something, and I was like, well, that's some interesting tidbit that I didn't understand IMDb. It's like my not cool in that it's like, but okay. So
So they went with someone far younger than Katharine Hepburn. Then that's
oh
interesting.
yeah.
They went with Eileen Brennan, who's like 30 years younger than she is.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah. Myron Loy would not do the film.
Myrna Loy.
Myrna Loy, excuse me. Myrna Loy was not doing the film. Apparently, they approached her as well, and so that was another reason why Catherine dropped out.
Myrna Loy would have been perfect since they're parodying one of her most famous characters too.
Yeah.
That would
I'm
have
sure
been
that's why
amazing.
she didn't do it.
Yeah, maybe.
Probably not. Yeah.
Well, and then the Scream is Fay Ray.
Yeah, I saw that last week. I was like, that is so cool that the Scream is Fay Ray, the first Scream Queen.
Yeah, because the gimmick, folks, with this is the doorbell on this mansion where they're at. When they press it, it's a scream, and yeah, it happens to be Fay Ray's scream from King Kong, which is a great gimmick. Also, the Dark and Stormy Night, which you have for all my friends here tonight who are down in Illinois.
Yeah, my lights are flickering, so you might lose me again.
Oh, yeah, I hear the siren. So stay safe there,
Going
Joe.
on here too.
Yeah, there too. And yeah, so what about you, Joe? How'd you feel about this film?
Well, this is. I'm ashamed to say this is the first time I've seen it, which I should have seen this before. I did find it interesting that Eileen Brennan does the same joke in Clue that she does in this movie.
Yes.
Where she's about to faint and needs to be caught, but she's falling into the arms of the blind Alec Guinness who doesn't know where she's going. Falls right through. I enjoyed it. I found, there are things that obviously haven't aged well, but like Groucho Marx said, there were things that he grew up watching in comedy that he enjoyed that, in his later years he realized, you know what, maybe they were kind of punching down. We can't change what was made, so we're just gonna have to roll with it. What was it that I did find it interesting that the character with the most racist quips and running around shooting a gun off is the one character that's American, which would be Sam Diamond. Which I'm wondering if that's that was a little nod to basically what our culture's been for forever now. As much as Peter Falk was kind of reprehensible, I found his Bogart to be spot on. and Eileen Brennan does a pretty decent Lauren Bacall.
Yeah.
I felt like Lauren Bacall and Katharine Hepburn at times.
Mhm.
Kind of a cross between both. I love the parodies of Nick and Nora Charles.
Mhm.
The only one that I found really problematic is Peter Sellers.
Gee, I wonder why.
And he would go on to make a Fu Manchu movie a couple years later that is far worse than anything in this. So
Really?
yeah, The Fiendish Plot of Dr. Fu Manchu, and it is interesting.
I didn't think I would find something that would be the equivalent to Andy Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's, that part
Mickey
that
Rooney.
people seem to forget.
Mickey Rooney.
Mickey Rooney, sorry. Thank you. Mickey Rooney. Thank you, Jeff. My brain is rattled. But, I didn't think I'd find one that would match that. But then the minute we see Peter Sellers, I knew what role he was in, but I'm like, okay, let's see it. I saw him in the car. And
You didn't have to wait very long.
the minute he opens his mouth, I'm like, oh, this is going to be a problem.
Yeah. I do like the attention to detail that while Charlie Chan always did have an accent in the movies, his sons always spoke, whether it's the number 1, number 2. I think this is his number 3 son.
Number 3 son, yeah. Number
3 adopted son.
Yes.
They speak perfect English, which I always like that about the Charlie Chan movies. I like it about the parody here. The parodies are pretty spot on. I just when I watched the Charlie Chan movies, and we watched Dark Alibi for the show earlier this year, I found that, obviously a white actor in yellowface, it's always going to have the negative connotation because, well, can't help it. That's the way they filmed things back then. But in those movies, he wasn't made out to be a buffoon.
Right.
And I know that all the detectives here are made out to be buffoons, but it feels a little worse when it's a white guy in yellowface making an Asian look like a buffoon.
And Lionel Twain keeps yelling at him about his broken English, which doesn't help.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pronouns and the adverb. It's like you need to use the pronouns.
Yeah.
Which funny nowadays. Nowadays they'd be yelling from a different angle on that. But yeah, overall I liked it. Was this the same mansion as Clue also?
Never
What was that question?
Up. Is this the same mansion as Clue?
I don't think so. No,
They all have a tendency to have those qualities.
It's different. Clue. It's funny. After watching this, I mean, don't get me wrong, Clue is still my favorite comedy of all time. I love Clue. But after watching this, I'm like, oh, so someone looked at this film and go, you know what? Here's how we could do it like this without necessarily we can update this film, because that's what I realized Clue is at its core now, is while it is, and we've covered Clue here on the show, while it is a parody of 12 Little Indians and all of those other mystery shows, it almost feels 10 Little Indians. Thank you. See, this is why I love having you, Jeff, because you help straighten my brain out.
I think we now refer to it as "And Then There Were None."
I may have been there for the original appearance of it in the theaters, but still cogent enough to remember stuff.
Well, no, that's why. Thank you very much on the correction on that. Yeah, but
I think now we refer to it as that, "And Then There Were None."
And then there were none. Yes,
the title has changed quite a few times.
You could do a whole
That's
show
less
on the problems with that title and what it changed over the years.
Yeah, that's a long history.
But I realized Clue was like an updated version of this movie, more
with
so.
Eileen Brennan, yeah.
And Eileen Brennan is in both of them.
But like I said, they were. It was a big time of doing big movie parodies. I mean,
sure, yeah.
Again, the cultural impact of SNL and Mel Brooks. It was just so everybody was running with it.
Yeah. And what about you, Ian? Your high level initial feeling with this?
Well, I watched it for the first time today. It's interesting because I was.
What fresh hell is this?
Well, no, I was supremely bored through most of it because it's weird. I got what it was and I appreciated what it was. to me, it reminded me a lot of reading a Mad Magazine parody.
Mm.
But I don't want to spend an hour and a half reading a Mad Magazine parody. It's 5 pages with some sharp writing and some great illustrations by Mort Drucker, the best of them. And then you're out. You get it, you chuckle, and you move on. This, I don't know. I was telling my wife earlier, I just might not be a whodunit guy. I haven't seen Clue, which, yes, I know Mark is a cardinal sin.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that at all.
We've talked
Katie,
about,
come back, Katie.
We've talked around Clue,
Yes,
very much so.
no.
It came out when I was 8. I had no interest in seeing it.
No.
And,
We know you don't like Knives Out.
Oh, don't even get me fucking started on Knives Out.
There you
Sorry.
go.
I gotta watch my mouth because my kids are 10 feet away. But no, but it gets to a point where it all comes down to scene after scene after scene of business. You know, who did this to whom? Oh, it couldn't have been me because I was over there, and she was over there, and he was over there, and it could have been me because I was, it always ends up devolving into this talking, and I'm like, just tell me who did it already. And by the time we get to this, the joke is that the plot is so complicated that it doesn't make any sense. And again, I get that. I can read that in a couple of sentences in a comic panel. I don't need it drawn out for 5 minutes. I will say Alec Guinness was the MVP for me, because as ridiculous as this part is, at the end, when he is revealed to have 6 different identities and he cycles through them like on a whim, going from this buttoned up British accent to this German accent to apparently being a woman and then going to not being a woman. I actually, it was like that Christopher Reeve changing into Superman thing just by adjusting his body language. I saw Alec Guinness as a woman for like a split second. I was like, I can kind of see it, just because of the force of his acting, and I guess to some extent the writing. But it was punctuated by enough laughs. I don't have nearly as much a problem with the troublesome humor as some people do, because I was raised with a father who bought me dice rules when I was 12. And I was weaned on Blazing Saddles. So I find all of it hilarious, and I don't care about punching down, up, or sideways. I think it's all great. However, it did offer me a fresh perspective on Charlie Chan, another movie that we talked about a couple years ago now, I think, Mark. Remo Williams' The Adventure Begins.
Oh, yes.
With Joel Grey.
Yes.
Getting a lot of flack for playing an Asian character in that movie. And we talked about it. And one of the things I love about your show, Mark, as I say every week, I feel like, is it gives me fresh historical context for a lot of the conversations that we're having today. And you can look at Joel Grey's performance in that movie. You can look at the Charlie Chan films and say, that's horribly racist. No, it's not. What's horribly racist is what Peter Sellers is doing in this movie, with the straight up stereotype.
Right.
You can argue that Joel Grey, that part could have gone to an Asian actor, but he took the role on. They went to great lengths to make him appear to be an Asian, sensei or whatever he was doing. I can't remember fully, but he was trying to turn in a legitimate performance and build a real character. The same thing with the Alibi movie that we talked about. Dark Alibi, right?
The three of us agreed on that Sidney Toller, while he's a white guy in yellowface, he's not playing negative stereotypes. Right. Whereas, like you said, Peter Sellers here absolutely is.
And one of the things I thought was kind of interesting was I did like that whole pronoun thing, but they didn't do anything with it. But it was interesting when Twain would pop up, or his voice would kind of flow in from the ether every once in a while. So, I can't remember the example, but he would Charlie Chan Wang would say something like "is confusing," and then the voice would say "it is confusing. It is confusing." Now, I think that's very clever. And if the movie itself were trying to make fun of the way that white people portray Asians in movies by, that broken English, that would have been really cool. But this is just, kind of not, I don't feel like they were commenting on it. They were just adding a joke to a stereotype, and they never really went anywhere with it. So yeah, it's okay. If I watched it again, I might appreciate it now that I know where it's all going. But it just, to me, I like the montage at the end where they're all they retire to their chambers and they're all met with different forms of, peril. And then there's the reveal and the reveal and the reveal. That's all right. But I feel like for an hour and a half, this movie could have been 60 minutes, and I would have been much more satisfied. Again, a Mad Magazine parody at its best acted.
And the funny thing about that is when I heard you describing that, basically it's just a lot of people in drawing rooms talking. If you watch a lot of these older 1930s mysteries that this is parodying, that's what a lot of them are.
Yeah.
The Thin Man is not. The Thin Man's very visual, and I really enjoy that. But yeah, if you watch a lot of those old drawing room mysteries, it's a bunch of people in a mansion, power goes out, someone gets bumped off, nobody move because either Charlie Chan or Sam Spade or somebody is going to be in here to figure it all out, and you're not going anywhere until they do. And there's always going to be more people getting bumped off. And I like that at the end, Lionel Twain. Oh, did we lose?
We lost. We did lose Jeff for a minute.
I like that Lionel Twain at the end points out to them that you do the lazy bit of just introducing a new character just to make that character the killer at the very end, because a lot of these movies did that. It would be
Like
something you haven't seen.
You add a character to the last 5 pages. It has nothing to do with the whole thing, and apparently that's supposed to be something. One of the things that since I first watched it, and there's been so many things about Truman Capote, and knowing especially like Truman Capote and the Swans, and I mean, apparently it was very open the way he was on set. Watching this now, knowing that, it honestly, every time I saw him, I got annoyed because apparently he was so amazingly drunk, like throughout this production. Like they wanted to recast him, like he was just ridiculously sloshed. And I mean, he didn't have that many scenes. And I see like all of these amazing actors that he's working with, and it's like I'm watching it now and having that information, and it just makes me so angry that he just wasted their time. He wasted, I mean, it's like to have that opportunity and stuff like that. And I know he was an alcoholic, and there's that, but it's like apparently it was just really bad, like how much he was drinking on set and on the entire shoot. And I think he was only there for like a week, and he just couldn't get it together.
They would explain the eye gimmick, because then he wouldn't have to be there that much. So
that's
you could put just about anybody if you get him to do the voiceover later.
Yeah.
Jeff, sir.
Yes, sir. Back.
You gave a great synopsis of that, but we didn't quite get your opinion. Now, you managed to see this in the theater. I'm wondering, one, how do you feel about this film? And two, what was the reaction in the theater when you watched it? If you remember.
Well, it was a different time, of course. I think the mistake that you can sort of see now in retrospect that maybe wasn't as apparent at the time was twofold. One is, I think that for all of its attempts to be sort of hip and happening like Mel Brooks was with Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, it's actually a pretty hoary old kind of style of comedy and approach, not too far off of something like the Carol Burnett Show or what Sid Caesar did with Your Show of Shows. And again, to Ian's point, it works well in a 5 or 7 minute sketch, even SNL and stuff like that, and yet drawn out to an hour and a half, it wears a little thin, especially when you've got so many running gags. And Neil Simon was the king of running gags, and a lot of times it was funny stuff in The Odd Couple, where it was sort of angsty, modern, New Yorkish kind of types that were, at each other's throats about nothing. But here, where it's doing parodies of Broken English or Unrequited Sexual Longing from The Gun Mall, or, French puns and, those kinds of things. I mean, his name is Perrier. For God's sake, it's just like, you could just imagine Neil Simon yelling out to his wife, "Hey, Marcia, Hercule Perrier." That's funny, Neil. Do something with Hercules, or whatever. Yeah. But when I saw it, and I was young, I was in junior high, it was pretty funny because I knew some of these characters from reading and books and different movies I had seen, and anything that was making fun of that kind of stuff was sort of humorous. But I'm with you. I felt it got a little bit draggy and tired. And to your point about Alec Guinness slumming. I think they all were to some degree slumming by playing these roles that I think are kind of beneath them even at the time, though it was a major motion picture. Neil Simon was coming off of the Sunshine Boys and success on Broadway, and the director was coming off of a number of successes on Broadway as well. But yeah, it was amusing. I think these kind of things tend to run out of steam, to Ian's point too, about 40 minutes in, and then it has to go on to wrap up a real plot. I found a little bit of that with Clue and some of these other kinds of parodies that have since come from. I just think they're hard to sustain sometimes. But at the same time, what I appreciated, and especially just watching it again, was to Joe's point, the really good actors who knew how to do more with their characters. Like, I mean, Alec Guinness, and what Ian was saying about Alec Guinness cycling through this, because that's what he was known for. He was known for these wide range of characters and different things, as was Peter Sellers, though Peter Sellers is pretty much one note here. So that was a great little coup, sort of a little Hollywood in-joke in its way. And I loved Nick and Nora Charles. I almost wish they could have just done a movie of those two, because I thought they had real chemistry. There was some real, I dare say, sexual sort of fun and banter between them, which is very reminiscent of William Powell and Myrna Loy back in the 30s. And they were great, and I think they had some of the subtler gags in it. I will say, though, maybe my favorite bit in it, and I shared this with Marcus, and this is what stood out in my mind when I thought of it before I watched this, is I remember certain lines like, okay, that's a gag that really was funny. Like when they're trying to figure out if Bensimum sir, is blind, and Perrier says, "Oh, Bensimum."
Yeah.
He goes, "He definitely is blind. Those are my funniest faces." I mean, that's a really good little bit, and some of those kind of things play even today if they're a little bit, unfortunate. Like he's making fun of this poor blind man. But overall, it's a long way to go for what is essentially kind of a Mad Magazine 5-page parody or a good 7-minute sketch on your show of shows.
and go ahead, Ian.
I was going to say, I think it would have been interesting to see what Mel Brooks would have done with this material, because I mean, he did a lot of parody movies, but there was just something that was off about this particular one. It's kind of like, I understand it, Joe, to your point, that it was making fun of movies that were pretty much all of this, but I think back to when we talked about Murder on the Orient Express. And oh my gosh, The Lady Vanishes.
Yes.
Movies that they're essentially these whodunits, these kind of parlor dramas, mysteries, but they took place on trains. And maybe it's the scenery and the different gimmicks you can do with movement and different cars and things like that heightens the sense of danger and even action. But this was just so staid that it's kind of like the reason I don't like the movie Lost in Translation is because, yes, you succeeded in making a film about two people being bored and disconnected in a city. I've been bored and disconnected in a city. I don't want to pay $13 to experience, to reminisce,
Well,
Yeah.
Can I throw in one quick thought? And I don't mean to interrupt anybody else, but I'll just say one quick thing, which I think also tempers it. And I forgot to make this in my original point after watching this. I don't know if I've seen it since maybe college, and then just a day or so ago to refresh myself. It's interesting because as big of a writer as Neil Simon was, very prolific, very successful. This was around the time when he started to only write about showbiz. And it's interesting because, his musical, like they're playing a song about showbiz. The Goodbye Girl, a couple years after this, showbiz. And then he started to do all the biographical stuff, which is about him wanting to be in showbiz, whether it was Brighton Beach Memoirs and, some of those kind of things. And it's just funny because he also did The Cheap Detective, which was 2 years later, which was like, let's do Peter Falk all again as the sort of Sam Spade parody. And I'm not saying that he became so successful that he didn't really have anything worth making fun of, maybe as much as when he was in New York, making fun of, the angst that is that experience. But he got a little softer. And he had also moved out to California by this time too, and just started to sort of navel gaze. And I think it limited him in his later years as a vital sort of, dare I say, contributing playwright, screenwriter, comic voice. The other thing I was going to just say quickly, and again, I'll try to be quiet and swift here, but
No
when
worries.
Mel was parodying, particularly in Blazing Saddles, it was a very political film at that time, and it was kind of ahead of its time in the sense of, wow, that was pretty daring, and especially for an old school sort of person like him who had been around since the 50s. But it had a real edge to it, and even Young Frankenstein did, in the sense that it was a little bit dirty and a little bit kind of crazy neuroses with insecurity and ego, and the kinds of characters that Gene Wilder played so well. Again, the sort of frazzled modern American male, right? Even in that kind of venue. This is just kind of jokes about puns and names and accents and the cliches of the genre, which, again, if you'd watched your shows or Carol Burnett or all that stuff, it'd been done to death already. None of this seemed all that fresh or new, but it's really low-hanging fruit. As some of it is very funny and well acted, it's like, wow, that's really what Neil Simon spent a couple years really doing, and then really the next 25 years just going back to his childhood of wanting to be a writer or somehow the world of showbiz, and it just seemed limited.
Well, I think part of the issue is story-wise, this really wasn't much. It's gag after gag after gag after gag after gag after gag after gag for 90 minutes, which can wear you out.
Yeah.
I mean, even the best Marx Brothers movies, they start to drag a little bit when they realize, oh shit, it's 40 minutes in and we haven't even begun the story yet.
That's right.
If you've ever watched most of the Marx Brothers movies, that's what it is.
We're spending a lot of time with that guy in the lemonade cart. Maybe we should get back to Fredonia. Isn't there a dictatorship going on here? Come on, guys. Depot, rein us in. Come on.
But that seems to be the issue here, is that they spend so much time building up the gags in the beginning, and I like most of them. But yeah, it becomes, oh wait, isn't there supposed to be a murder going on here? Isn't something supposed to be happening where somebody dies and there's going to be a mystery about who killed them? And I think that's probably why it drags a little bit, because you lose focus.
Well, I mean, kind of to that point, I hadn't really thought about this as a possibility until you mentioned it, Joe. But what if this had been, instead of a parody, just either a comedy or not necessarily a drama, but it's sort of an adventure in the vein of, not the film adaptation certainly, but the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Alan Moore's comics, where he's bringing together, all these great characters from literature, and they become sort of like a Victorian era superhero team. What if you get someone calling all of the era's great fictional detectives, we'll call it Charlie Chan, Sam Spade, all that, together to solve a mystery, and they have to use what made them famous characters in literature or film or whatever, use their particular skills in different ways to work together to figure out, who done it. Can they pull it together? There's comedy to mind there, or if you wanted to go just the complete straight route, that would have been really cool to see. But yeah, I'm with you. I was kind of, there's way too much business of them getting to the house and the gargoyle falling on people with the feet. Like, yeah, the chalk outlines of the feet, that was kind of cute. But then by the time like everyone goes through, I'm like, what is this movie?
That's a lot of gargoyles, by the way. I mean, a lot of gargoyles.
And it's funny too that every once in a while you can see that Neil Simon doesn't have a good gag, so he writes a dirty joke in there. And even gives that occasionally to the better people. Like there's the famous part where Maggie Smith goes, "Where's my dickie?" And it's just a little bit like, and it's like, wow, I guess you're bereft of a joke there, so you throw in kind of a bad play on words there. I mean, just some of those seem, you wince thinking that Neil Simon was this big vaulted writer at the time, and he's stooping that low.
Well, I honestly think with this, and I'm not too familiar with Neil Simon stuff. I know The Odd Couple, and I remember Biloxi Blues being a big thing of, Neil Simon, Biloxi Blues with Matthew Broderick at the time, who was coming off, I think he was coming off of,
Ferris Bueller.
Ferris Bueller.
And he won a Tony for Brighton Beach Memoirs as well, playing that same character in the first of the trilogy.
And if you look at Biloxi Blues, though, you're almost like, well, this is almost like Ferris Bueller Goes to the Army. But in a way, he borrows a lot from Hughes. but thinking of the stuff that I've seen of Neil and his other stuff, I'm wondering if he bit off more than he could chew with this film as far as how to handle so many main characters at once, because two characters at a time, I think he does really well. Or like with Biloxi Blues, we pretty much stay with Matthew, if I remember it correctly, because I did watch it years after it came out. You stay with like the one character. Odd Couple, you basically have your two main characters who can do the dialogue really well. Here, you've got an all-star cast, but you're trying to write witty dialogue, and this is where I think Clue succeeds where this film fails, in that the dialogue, it just doesn't feel, it, like you said, it feels like insert gag here or whatnot. It just feels clunky as far as trying to handle all of these main egos. I think you're right. I think I would love to see a film with these characters, and as we talked about with a couple of the other films this year going to public domain soon, I'd love to see a straight movie, whodunit, with a collection of the world's greatest detectives like this in a mystery, trying to solve and play off each other. Because you do get a few of those moments in here where they're trying to figure something out, like one of the murder, like at the beginning when they sit down at the table and they figure out it's poison, and they figure out the swords are coming down, and two of them figure it out, where they're playing off each other's talents of the actual characters. I loved that bit. I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. And then we get into gimmick joke.
See, when Ian said that idea, maybe it's the natural ad guy sitting in a room of creatives brainstorming coming out of me. But my first thought was, it's funny, all these people who are in this movie and essentially in those kinds of movies, they are in the drawing room murder mysteries. It's rich people, it's nice settings, it's an expensive train, an expensive mansion, cruise down the Nile, et cetera, et cetera. It would be interesting to put those characters, let's say it's in the late 40s as a time period when you didn't have forensics and CSI and all that kind of stuff, but have these kinds of characters taken out of their comfort zone, and they're tracking somebody who's a serial killer, who's doing it out in the open, who's doing it out in the city or something like that, and they have to figure out who this person is. A little bit akin to Professor Moriarty, who is out doing crime wave stuff in the Sherlock Holmes stories. But to Ian's point, what if you had these five people, invited by the mayor of the city to figure out who is this serial killer, which would have been novel and new at the time, and it's a serious thing, and let's see how each of these people can break out of their comfort zone to try to find a killer that doesn't fit the typical killer that they're used to in these very Tony settings and elegant gentlemen thieves and such.
And then there could be a cash prize.
Well, or just it could be a cash prize, a reward from the city, or just the competitive nature of it. And to Ian's point about what is it, is there something in Poirot's Little Gray Cells and seeing things differently, which he is very much, Agatha Christie said, parody sort of, or her take on Sherlock Holmes, of seeing things that are there but most people don't see, or some of the other characters who are good people, are good reads of people, or Charlie Chan, who always sort of provides an ancient sort of, I don't know, if you will, Aesop's fables, or sort of Confucius kind of moral back and forth yin and yang quality to it. Which one wins? Which is the sort of presiding approach that maybe would prevail? That would be a fascinating story. In fact, Ian, somebody's going to watch this damn show and they're going to steal your idea. And I'm here to tell you, we're going to find a lawyer.
Look at Joe.
Write it, because you got a couple years before these characters go into public domain, like Dick Tracy's going to public domain, The Shadow, Popeye. Well, Popeye's not really a detective, but you got a lot of these great characters going into public domain.
No, but now that you mentioned Popeye, I want to see a team up of Dick Tracy, the Shadow, and Popeye. Popeye being the brute guy who ends up.
No, he's the guy who's always like talking in his breath, like, "Oh, you think you're pretty good about this watch? Yeah, I don't need to tell time. I know what the time is." But it's like, whoa, it's the moon.
Popeye ends up getting entangled, and you have the Shadow and Dick Tracy involved, and Popeye, it's sort of around a Popeye.
Ellery Queen was a big sleuth in the 40s and 50s. That was a big detective.
Go ahead.
I was like, what about this? What if there was a reimagining today, written by David Mamet and co-directed by David Fincher and Mel Brooks.
Holy
There would have been a lot of swearing.
Here's
No,
my
I'm not
money.
now. I mean,
Here's
Mel
my
Brooks
money.
is 98. He's still kicking.
And then
He's got a lot
one of the detectives
I mean-
prematurely says it was done by Professor Plum with the candlestick in the conservatory, and Sam Spade turns on him like Al Pacino turning on Kevin Spacey and uses every swear word in the book. Who said you could open your mouth, you fairy? You don't open your mouth unless you know the score.
And people, if you're wondering, this film is not a deep film. I was surprised how shallow. I was surprised how shallow the mystery actually was with it. I thought there was going to be more intriguing, but like you guys both, everybody here's kind of said it. It was more, let's move from gimmick to gimmick to gimmick, rather than, here's a complete story until we get to the last, say, metaphorically, the last 5 pages of this movie, to where suddenly it's very interesting, where we find all the connections that all the detectives have to, Ben Simum, who is actually not Ben Simum.
It's also more of a parody in some respects of the most popular children's cartoon show at the time, which was Scooby-Doo, where it's somebody in a mask and he's revealing it. Sherlock Holmes, all of Agatha Christie's work was never that way. Like, this person is really this person. It was always in plain sight. I mean, the great thing about Agatha Christie's writing, it was the number one thing that she tried to do, is it has to be there on the page. You have to see it. You just don't see it. And Doyle was the same way. It was a little harder to read for modern audiences because there's a certain Victorian language that is a little bit of a hurdle there. But that's all there too. It's very rarely that the murderer is in some weird guise that is done. And I mean, the last thing here is, and then it's actually Nancy Walker's character. Like, we haven't beaten that already. And Neil Simon is sitting there going, I'm slapping my knee and my wife is agreeing with me. Thank you, Marcia. I'll write another movie for you. But he's kind of belying what the actual stories were like for most of these books and literature or movies. I mean, I would say he missed the point of Agatha Christie entirely.
Well, and that was one of the things about the film when they had the Nancy Walker character, and then that she's the maid and the chef or whatever. And then they're like, well, of course, she was the reason why she didn't speak is because she's built of wax and all that stuff. And I'm like, wait, what? So she was walking and she's a robot, yet you just put her in a box, and then you're supposed to have the audience like, of course, like, wait, what? How dumb are we all supposed to be drinking it as much as Truman Capote right now? Like, what is happening? Like, what is really happening right now? Like, you put her in a box and you're trying to tell the audience, like, well, this is why she didn't speak and all that. It's like, it's obvious. Like,
there may not have been alcohol involved, but there may have been some of the devil's lettuce while Neil was writing this, thinking this was the hilarious.
And it's funny too, because at the time you had the younger person's show, which maybe by being the upstart, they could be more edgy. But, you had Saturday Night Live parodying Nixon during that time. And it wasn't the rich little Nixon where he's just like, doing the peace sign and all that kind of mugging and stuff. It was Dan Aykroyd playing a very kind of almost seriously comedic version of Dick Nixon, which was self-loathing and brooding and drinking and irritable and sort of, walking around just like kind of frustrated. A very sophisticated parody of this. And Neil Simon's like, he gives away everything about all these characters within the first 5 minutes. If you saw the first entrance of the Wang character, you got him the whole movie. I mean, it's just running gags, a buildup of that, but it's the same shtick, and it doesn't go anywhere other than these ridiculous reversals or reveals like the wax thing or Ben Simum has 7 personalities and stuff, which is like, that's a little convenient without really being logical.
I love your version of Neil Simon and his wife is basically Nick and Nora Charles. And runs to the other.
Maybe that's why they're the better couple. And he's like, Marcia, read this. Is this funny? Yeah, I think it's good. Change this line. I like the way you lived that. Okay, I'm changing it.
Ian, you were saying something and I cut you off. I apologize.
Oh no, that's a great observation. I was thinking, like, talking about going deep. I mean, I was sort of waiting for, because I know who Peter Sellers is, and it's an obviously ridiculous makeup job, with a worse accent. I was waiting for the movie to do that turn where, if they're parodying these characters from literature and film, and the what you know about Charlie Chan is that it's typically a white guy in, as it's been put here, yellow face, to do something with that, to reveal that he's not actually, an Asian detective, or
Yeah.
to make fun of that trope, or to dig into it somehow. And they just never did. It's just start to finish. To Jeff's point, you get it in the first 5 minutes, and that's all it is, which, that's fine, because the first time you see it, it's so outrageous, like, wow, they're actually going there. But then by the end of the movie, I'm like, okay, here's another fortune cookie, aphorism gag. And, it was
See-
cute the first time, but not so much by the 27th time.
See, and I thought maybe that's what they were going with some of these characters. I would have liked it maybe to reveal that, oh, I'm not actually Asian. He pulls off a mask or whatever and says this has been my cover or whatever. Something along that lines or whatnot, like you said, cut deep. Or I thought they were going to do that with the Sam Diamond character, because they play at it just a little bit to where, well, why do you have all those Muscle Men magazines in your office? And playing like this very misogynist, kind of very brash guy is actually in the closet, and they were kind of hinting at that. I'm like, okay, I see where you're going with this. I kind of like poking the fun at what the Sam Spade character type was, the very man of man, the drinking but they don't play with that. They like it,
Well, and let's talk about the Sam Diamond with the reveal at the end.
Yeah.
Which again made no sense, because then we realized, so you are the real Sam Diamond. I am, doll. I'm like, so hold on. So your reveal is that you're an actor and you're saying this person that's on this desk and you want the money is Sam Diamond, but you're Sam Diamond. So then that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's like, again, what?
It was
you guys have all. Oh, go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Yeah, that's all I had to say.
Well, I was just going to say, to that very point, again, we're rewriting a better movie that maybe we would make today or whatever.
Yeah.
But it is funny because, you think about stuff where this feels like it's already in a time capsule, and it felt that way at the time. But here you have Peter Falk in this landmark procedural called Columbo, which Richard Levinson and William Link took, I think, around all the 10 major studios at the time, 4 or 5 times trying to sell it, because they couldn't, because nobody wanted to see a whodunit. It all has to be a whodunit. And as you'll remember, Columbo in the first half hour of the 90-minute show shows you the murderer, which was not only fascinating because it shows you it and sort of begs you to determine, if you can see it before Columbo does, what he's going to figure out the crime on, but also it puts you in the position of sort of empathizing or relating to the killer, because that's the first character you see with, and ultimately he's the bigger role here and than Columbo is, in a way. And here's this movie that is just happy to be a parody of the worst kind of obvious jokes about sex or race or homophobia, et cetera, and it doesn't go anywhere else. There's nothing else to it. There's nothing that gives it a little bit more edge or something. I mean, for example, like the success of The Thin Man, just like the Astaire and Rogers musicals, were counters to the Depression, and a lot of these things were counters to war. We couldn't necessarily worry about this big world and fascism and the Depression and all this stuff, but we could go and find relief with escapism with somebody in a Tony setting where there were beautiful places and goodness prevailed, and it was sort of simple and easy, and we were asked to play along with it, like as it is a parlor game. It is sort of our a version of charades or whatever you want to poke or whatever you might want to call that. But there's nothing much here to it than, it'd be funny. Let's make a fun out of Hercule Poirot, because Murder on the Orient Express was a big movie 2 years earlier. And we'll get James Coco to play, and we'll call him Perrier, because that's the big French drink now. Isn't that funny? And it's like, no, it isn't. And it wasn't really that funny then. The better stuff is when you let a comedic actor like James Coco, put him in bed with James Cromwell and act like they're not an old married couple.
Right.
That's where the fun is. The rest of it is just painfully skit-like. And Neil Simon started writing your show of shows, so maybe this was his homage to that, but it doesn't go deeper than that. And Young Frankenstein did, Saturday Night Live did, Columbo did, all these things around that were really edgy things in the late 60s and 70s, and here they do this parody of all these tropes and mystery cliches, and it's shallow.
Yeah, it is shallow. And I think we all are agreement, kind of the Charleston characters are probably my favorite ones, but I have a feeling Maggie Smith and David Niven were just doing their own thing on this film. I honestly think that they were just like, no, we're just going to play it this way. I don't care what the director says. I don't care what's on the paper. We'll say the lines of that, but they play it their own way because they are the true out of all of them. I mean, yeah, it's really weird to see Sam Diamond character and going, oh my God, this is if Columbo was this is like anti-Columbo here. This is like the nega Columbo, the mirror universe one.
I'll just always love that. Oh, that's tacky. Oh,
yeah. Oh my God.
That
has got to be my favorite moment is when he whispers and the way she plays it. I'm just like, oh, I love her. I'm like, I'm just sitting there.
That's just tacky. No.
She's so good. She's so good.
And we'll wrap it up here again. But I think what separates things, like what makes even Clue, even though I know it drags a little, but I think what makes like Clue and Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles and even some of the Zucker Brothers stuff in the 80s, like the airplane and that, while they were kind of still gimmick to gimmick to gimmick, they were able to write a connective tissue in there to still give you an overall narrative story from start to finish. So while there were lots of gimmicks in there, you actually have kind of this progression of plot. Whereas in here, as we say, the minute they get in the building, it stalls. I mean, the minute Capote shows up, it goes, oh, there will be a murder at midnight. And then it takes a while before that murder happens. Meanwhile, they're just going from skit to skit to skit. You're just like, nothing's moving forward, at least in some of those Zuckerberg, Top Secret. Nobody talks about Top Secret. Top Secret is a wonderful parody movie.
Oh, yeah.
That more people need to talk about, because that is one as well that, while it does have gimmick to gimmick to gimmick, it had connective tissue. We ran into this. This ended up having the same problem that the later parody films, the late 90s, early aught parody films ended up having, in that they were that exact thing, where they were, oh, here's a gimmick, here's a gimmick, here's a gimmick. We're going to just loosely tie them together so we could get from one gimmick to one parody scene to another scene. Like, not another epic movie or, epic movie or whatnot, to where there's not really a story as much as just a series of, we see our main character go from one comedic setting to another, but there's no real moving of the story. Whereas Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, some of those other parody movies, they had that connective tissue to where they have a story and then they worked in the gimmicks. Here, I think Neil Simon came up with the gimmicks, saying, hey, I got all these great characters. Wow, how am I going to put them together? Oh, well, just do this. It's like, and you guys are right. Stuff in there, as comedic as it did, made sense for the most part in most of those ones that I mentioned too. Here, we have the Charleston show up in their room, and it's all full of cobwebs and stuff, and a robotic mouse that's not a robotic mouse, which was kind of a gimmick. But it didn't make sense of why he did those rooms the way they did, and it just the urge was righteous, but the face was wrong, as Ralph the dog would put it with this film. I think in that his intentions of putting something together, I think, were good. I just think this is material that was not fit for Simon to properly handle. necessarily, at least in film form. I suspect if he wrote this like a script for a play, this probably could play out a little better, because then you could just do people, certain people. But here, when you're doing film, it's a lot more at once. And
Well,
I just don't think can handle a lot at once.
Well, I mean, these aren't. I mean, they are characters by definition, but they're just bouncing off of each other from one gag to the next. There's no through line. I mean, you think about Airplane. You've got Ted and Elaine. You think about Blazing Saddles. You've got Cleavon Little and Gene Wilder.
Oh.
You've got these great character and or relationships that are in the middle of a straight movie.
Mm-hmm.
That happens to have these weird things kind of going on in the periphery. This doesn't work. I mean, I'm glad I watched it, because it did make me laugh in parts, but just not enough to sustain to say I might watch it again in a few years or so. But it's not something I am anxious to revisit.
Sure. I think that's a good point there, Katie. Would you revisit this again? What's your kind of final take with this?
Maybe to get some style inspiration from Maggie Smith and Eileen Brennan, because I love Eileen Brennan's dress, that backless dress. Everything about that, I would wear that now. It's like I was watching that and I'm like, I could see that on a red carpet. I could see this, the Maggie Smith outfit, that white.
Oh yeah,
classic again, amazing. But yeah, it was very interesting rewatching it and not remembering all of the stuff that was being said. That was just, it wasn't even funny. It was just like hateful, like racist talk. I'm like, God,
well, it's humor is in the eye of the beholder. I thought that stuff was very funny.
I mean, one of the things that he said, I was like, Jesus Christ, wow, that just came out of his mouth. But
I had that reaction.
Yeah.
Was that?
I said I had that reaction a few times with Jesus Christ, did he really just say that?
Yeah.
Well, right, but here's the thing. Like it might be, if I had to hazard a guess, I would say it's shocking now because this has not been part of our culture for 20 years.
Yeah.
But up until about 15, 20 years ago, this was de rigueur. These types of jokes were, nothing that people were shocked by. Now, were they wrong? You can talk about that. But as far as like, oh my God, I can't believe they said that. I mean, this was nothing. I mean, it's funny. I mean, to me.
There was one term that I was like, man, I have not heard anyone say that. And that's, I'm not going to repeat it now. But it was Sam Diamond that said it.
I don't know, even 20 years ago, if you would have had a Chinese character and a blind character in one room, and a character says, "Oh, you don't think he could smell a Chinaman?" I don't think that would happen even 20 years ago. I don't think that would happen.
You don't have to go back 20 years ago. You can look at Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle and its sequel, and even the third movie. They were having all sorts of racial stereotypes flying all over those movies. Not specifically what you're talking about, but in terms of raunchiness, I mean, raunchiness has been almost completely sucked out of the culture. I think for the worse in terms of the mainstream. But what people consider shocking and offensive today was box office gold 15 years ago.
And that is true. And I think, I don't know, maybe it hits differently depending on the rest of the film. I think maybe if this film, I don't know if maybe this film handled things differently, while it would be a little shocking, it'd be like, oh, okay. But I think because of the other issues that we've seen with this, we've mentioned tonight with this film, I think some of the jokes maybe land a little extra harsh for some people. You know what I'm saying? Versus, say, you get Airplane. Okay, for a prime example of Airplane, you look at some of the jokes in there, you're just like, wow, some people mentioned about Barbara Billingsley talking jive. And on a bit of a hand, you're just like, okay, I can kind of see that. But on the other hand, especially with the whole way the rest of the film is, and plus anyone who knows Barbara Billingsley and the character she plays, that's more of the joke than her actually speaking jive, is the fact that you've got Mrs. Cleaver speaking jive. You know, it's not the jive speak that is the joke so much as holy crap, which apparently she rehearsed with them in at lunchtime. She wanted to do because she, you know, she, apparently they rehearsed it. And yeah, you know, maybe it's partly the rest of the film too, you know, that kind of subconsciously you take into account to whether or not a joke lands as hard or as harsh as it does, even if it is offensive. It may be the rest of the film. This film really felt like it had an identity crisis for sure. It really felt like, okay, we're gonna do this, but I want to kind of play this or what. Like me personally, my favorite joke in this entire movie was the address of where the mansion was, which I did. Which, yeah, exactly. That was my fun. That was where I laughed the hardest, and it's hilarious. And I know it's such a basic elementary joke, but it was still great because I actually rewound the film because I missed a part. So I missed the joke the first time, and when I rewound it, I liked it, and then it just I'm like, oh my God, Tutu Twain. I'm like,
Tutu Twain, where Lionel Twain lives.
Yeah, where Lionel Twain. I'm like, how did I miss? Oh, Tutu Twain. That was where I laughed probably the hardest out of this movie, was that because that type of joke was what I was used to from like the 80s parodies and that. Like I said, that kind of pun, that kind of like in your face joke that you didn't realize until, like, my favorite joke in Airplane is he had a drinking problem. That is the best gimmick, and it was a running gimmick through the whole film, was the drinking problem, because it was a common phrase put into a way that you would have never thought of an actual problem drinking.
You know, it's interesting. Sometimes even with comedies, even with parodies, you want them to have something that's a little bit more interesting, an X factor, another line that's underneath it. William Goldman famously said, movies are about this, but they're also about this. Seven is about the search for a serial killer killing off people according to the 7 deadly sins, but it's really about Morgan Freeman's character kind of coming back to join the human race, because it starts with him just morose and he's going to retire, and then by the end his eyes are wide, he's terrified, and he's trying to save Brad Pitt and he can't. Here it's missing that X factor or something else going on. Mm-hmm. I would argue that Airplane had that, in the sense that while it's a lot of rapid fire gags and plays on words and maybe the hoariest of puns, the real X factor of that movie is that they geniusly cast all those same actors in the exact same roles that they played in straight movies for decades of their career, without a nary change in how they delivered it. But because it's ludicrous, it's funny as fuck. And Robert Stack said, I can be funny. Don't you want me to be funny? It's like, no, we want you to do it exactly like you did in 30 years of a screen career and TV career, because that's what's funny, because you're saying absurd lines. And, you know, we Blazing Saddles is all about black and white relations and how people deal with racism, et cetera, et cetera. You know, even the early Scream stuff, I think, you know, was a parody of all the tropes, and the fact that these slasher movies have become so much that they started talking about them like they do in the movie about, well, here's what happens in these movies. So it's very sort of meta, the very first version of that in or as strongly in for the newer generations as that was. This is just a little shallow. It feels like a skit, and it's got some funny bits and some good actors. And, you know, David Nism, when he's saying like, oh, this is, sugar candy, and he picks up the mouse, and and the mouse is making, no, it's real. He flings it, because he's all about dignity. That's about as close you get to something going underneath it. Like, well, maybe that's what Nick and Nora Charles was, dignity at all costs or something like that. But it's not enough. There needed to be something just a little bit more here. Like, is it a parody about how we find refuse in these kind of silly drawing room things because we don't want to deal with the problems that are going outside during the 70s, which was Watergate and the end of Vietnam and inflation and gas prices and lines to just get a tank that were, 2 miles deep and stuff. I don't know. I'm not saying that Neil Simon had to be that responsible, but it's missing something that would have given it just a little bit more of that X factor to make it more involving.
And it is Dick and Joel Charleston are the only two that really have more than one layer, it seems.
Yeah.
Everyone else is kind of one note. But the thing that I liked about it is the actors playing them did a great job doing a parody of those stock characters and the actors who played them.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you got this much talent, and they're all in, even as ridiculous as the film is. You know, they commit to these characters. That's, you know, as there are on probably the page, which is, you know. And Joe, what's your final thought with this film?
I mean, basically that it is, like I said earlier, it focuses so much on all the gags that it forgets to tell like a coherent story, and then at the end it just does the whole, you know, the whole reveal after reveal after reveal after reveal thing, and they're all right and they're all wrong. So I think that and yeah, it's a good performance piece for everybody except Peter Sellers. Man, I could not get over Peter Sellers. The part was just straight up racism. There was like nothing else to it.
Oh, it's just so wrong. And see, to your point, Mark, even Clue, the X factor there, or I think was clever about it, is you got to decide the ending of the movie, just like there's many possible endings in the board game. So while it was a movie of the board game, it still remained true to the essence of that board game. That gave it that extra. Here, it's a Scooby-Doo trope at the end that is not really part of any of these kinds of classic movies or stories. And it just feels all the more undisciplined because of it. They don't stay on. Neil Simon has not stayed on track.
And I think that's what this film needed. It needed that Clue factor. The difference also between this and Clue is the extras died. You had more than just one murder to solve. There kept on being, you know, that's where I was hoping they would go with this, because you had all these pairs of people show up. I thought one of them was going to die.
Or they would each lose their pair. Wouldn't that be funny if they were like all left alone, which is kind of the whole thing. And then there were none, is you lose sort of the allies that you may have, or people that you were sort of believing was either your friend or the murderer. And then suddenly they're out of the picture.
See, and I was hoping they would go kind of that route. I think it's the fact you only have one murder in here with all of these detectives that it cuts the steam and it pulls the rug out from itself quite a bit with this, from the potential of really actually making something, I think, a little bit more engaging. This film is not engaging. It you know, go ahead, Katie.
Oh no, all I was gonna say is that you guys the fact that Zucker Brothers keep being brought up and stuff like that, it's like, you guys ready to do a panel on a Kentucky Fried Movie? Let me know. Because if you want to talk about wrong and different things, I mean, it's one of my favorites.
Big Jim Slade? Is that the guy's name?
Big Jim Slade from the Kansas City Chiefs. Thank you very much.
No, I'm not saying
of Nebraska is Omaha.
I wasn't saying the Zucker brothers themselves all did gold, because some of them were involved in the later scary movies. God help us. But no, I was just mentioning some of the ones of theirs that I enjoyed. But yeah, you're right. Kentucky Fried Movie is definitely another one of those. Definitely the 70s is interesting for humor.
And if so, this time the woman may decide to latch onto his honker.
Yeah.
Do you remember that line, Katie?
Yes, and
I think it was right before Jim makes his appearance as the record player. Is the recording is telling him how to move through the machinations of making love to your lady.
It's a classic. It is a classic.
But man,
zinc oxide in you.
Some of those later Zucker Brothers movies, man. If you want to see some movies that make They make this one look amazing in comparison.
Oh God, yeah.
Late Zucker Brothers movies are terrible.
Yeah, late ones.
See, they lost the essence of that other layer. Like they are doing, it's almost the same script of that famous 1950s B movie, but they're saying more ludicrous things. But it's the same tone, and all the actors are playing the kinds of roles they played in those movies, which is really funny. Yeah. And I don't know if they were in on the joke entirely, but Leslie Nielsen got a whole new career out of it, so he must have somehow figured it out.
And the thing with Top Secret was it was played as it followed the script. The plot moves along like a regular World War II film. It played off of that, quite a bit. But So there you have it, folks. We're going to wrap it
Chocolate
up.
mousse.
Chocolate mousse.
Deja vu. Haven't we
Latrine.
met somewhere
We
before?
have met somewhere before. I'm not sure. Are you sure?
Montage.
and then
The
of
French
course,
resistance.
I know a little German. He's sitting right over there.
damn it.
That's always my favorite. It's like, hey.
The cow costume. You're always in such a hurry. Can't we just wait for a minute?
Oh, damn it. Oh, okay. Now we're thinking of better comedies tonight. So we'll wrap it up here. So I hope you enjoyed this discussion, folks. I think we're all in agreement. If you like all of these actors and want to see them in something a little bit early, you may want to check it out, but be warned from what we have said tonight with it. Go into it with some context. So we're going to wrap it up here. And this is always where I give my panel the license to shill. So please go around. Ian, you'll be first tonight. Go ahead and shill, sir.
I'm Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com, as well as YouTube. If you look up YouTube and type in Kicking the Seat, you'll find me there doing roundtable reviews and interviews and all sorts of things with views in them. And I'm also here on Monday nights talking movies with you, and I love it. So thank you for having me again.
Thank you for coming. Keep coming back. We appreciate it. Katie, you're up, license to shill.
I'm Katie Glidewell, the blonde in front. I'm the bald in front just right now, but hopefully October that'll be back to blonde. And you can find me on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at the blonde in front, and on the many podcasts and blogs that these gentlemen have with Mark and Ian on Earth's Mice Critics and Kicking the Seat. Loving talking to these guys about movies and all the good and bad that come with it.
All the good and bad. Mr. York, please shill away.
I write movie reviews at theestablishingshot.org. I write a couple of columns a month for pipelineartist.com about the industry and trends. Happy to guest on Ian's show as well as your show, Mark, with Frequency, and I'm honored to do both. Thank you very much for being friends and great hosts and terrific shows. Love paneling it up with you guys. Joe, great to see you again. Katie, always a pleasure. And I'm on Instagram, Jeff York Chicago, where I run most of my reviews, and then Jeff York Caricatures, where it's mostly about the illustrations that often accompany my reviews, as I have a fondness for the art of caricature. And also I'm on TikTok, Jeff York Chicago, yes, which blends both in a minute, in an only minute review. The reviews are just 1 minute.
Which you are wonderful at. I love your
Oh, you're very kind.
By sure. And Joe, sir, please shill away.
With the Literary License Podcast, book to screen and everything in between. And this coming month, we're going to be doing this week Kiki's Delivery Service and Spirited Away. As part of the Dark Families theme that's ending next month, actually. We're continuing doing anthology films with one of the greatest anthology horror films of all time, Dead of Night from 1945.
Yes!
Sorry. And one of the worst anthology movies of all time, The Devil's Messenger, which was compiled of 3 episodes of 13 Demon Street, a Swedish horror series starring Lon Chaney Jr. That really was a terrible bore, and the movie is a terrible bore. And no, so that'll be fun. That'll be fun to revisit. Thanks, Keith. That's it for me for shilling for right now.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. I know we went a little late, but I appreciate all of you. I appreciate our live viewers tonight and all of you out there. Thank you for your support, helping us by watching our videos and such. You've helped us make partner so we can do all that super chat, stickers, whatever else it is. But thank you, every single one of you. Next week is Murders in the Rue Morgue. We are heading back to the 30s, so we hope you can join us for that. Until then, folks, we'll just say a good night, everyone.